idiom.
Time to relax and forget each care.
Not yet.
Just settle back in your easy chair.
Uh-oh.
Here is entertainment for you.
Denied.
You'll find it so enjoyable too.
All right.
So listen to all from beginning to end, 'cause your friend
Give me a break.
John Ford
is here again.
Great!
It's the Evening Rancor, the podcast from that guy who talks about stuff, John Ford. Any links mentioned on the show are available at johnford.radio. Today, we're coming to you direct from your mom's basement. Welcome to the Evening Rancor, the John Ford podcast.
And here we go with another one of those amazing, fantastic John Ford podcasts with your host, me, John Ford, the Evening Ranker, also the name of this particular podcast. I thought it was clever when I came up with it, but not quite so sure anymore. But I'm stuck with it, so there's that. All right, here's something I've been thinking about a little bit over the last couple of days or so. Man, that's some swinging music. Yeah! Anyways, here's something I've been thinking about over the last couple of days. And let me kind of lower this music a little bit here because it's really starting to annoy the living hell out of me. So here's something I've been thinking about. And coming from a background as a broadcaster, as it were. Coming from the background as somebody who spent multiple decades abusing multi-million-dollar radio facilities on the air.
My ass.
And this might be of interest to folks that are doing podcasts now, because let's face it, basically what podcasts are is it's anyone can do a kind of a radio show, right? I mean, that's what it is. Whether you have any experience or doing it or not. It would be like, hey, you want to be a brain surgeon? Okay, come over here. You know, you're not going to screw anything up.
I don't know.
Just watch where you're poking. The last few years, the last decade or so in broadcasting, actually a little bit more, but I don't want to go into that because I feel old enough as it is anyways. I spent in talk radio, but before that I did music radio and morning shows and that types of things with multiple sidekicks and hosts. And one of the things you would often say to each other was, you know, you would play your song, whatever format you were in, rock format or whatever the hell it was. And then you would do your little outro of the song, and then you'd talk, and then you do your bit with your co-host, and maybe you had some kind of wacky bit that you were going to do, and you would do that wacky bit, and then you would go into the commercials, and then and the next song, or whatever the hell it was, right? And you would start talking to each other about maybe what you were going to do next, or whether or not that thing worked or not. But more often you would talk about just stuff. And then you would say to each other, man, it's just too bad that we can't talk about the stuff during the commercials or during the songs on the air that we talk about, as opposed to, you know, the wacky bits that we talk about when the mic is on, when the mic is hot. Because what we say to each other when the mic isn't hot is often much more interesting than what we say to each other when the mic is actually on.
Oh.
And I think that's a really interesting concept. It's about intimacy, right? And it's about honesty. In that there's certain things, especially in this day and age, that you're never going to say when the mic is hot.
Yeah, boy.
Right? Even back then, 20, 30 years ago. And a lot of it had to do with what you could legally say, or what would piss off the management of said radio station you work for. Whereas today, it's more about there are certain things that are anathema to say. Like, for example, I couldn't say women have vaginas. That just wouldn't be allowed.
No.
There are things that we used to just take as fact 15 minutes ago that are just not true. I guess that's the word for it, that are just not factual today. Whether or not you believe they're factual.
No.
But beyond that, there's this concept of truth and intimacy. And let's face it, that's the hardest thing in the world to pull off in broadcasting or in podcasting. Because so much of what podcasting is two people talking to each other. But you're not having that intimate conversation that you'd be having with them where you could talk about anything and they might look at you and say, wow, I really agree with you, but there's no way I could ever admit to that in like real life, to like real people, because I would lose my job or I'd be shot. I'd be hung from the yardarm. I'd be whipped with a wet noodle.
I'm a bad girl.
In that intimate kind of conversation. But that's really what you strive for because, that's real. That's the real thing, baby. And it ain't Coke.
Well,
I remember going back a few years in radio, and I was still kind of like doing that radio, trying to do the radio voice. You know what I mean there, buddy boy?
Put down the mic.
And he said, one of the hardest things to do, it's just a shame that people spend their first 10 years in radio learning to talk like a disc jockey, and then the next 20 learning to talk like a human being. And I just, kind of took it to mean the affected voice. But what he was really saying is the hardest thing to do when you get behind that mic is to be yourself and to create that intimacy with the person that's listening. That's hard, man. Or to create intimacy with the person that you're interviewing. And that's why interviews have a tendency to be so ponderous, is because you're just, for the most part, a lot of times it's not about learning something new. It's not about creating new dialogue. It's about one-upsmanship. It's about, being more clever than the other guy and getting your point across or getting them to agree with you or winning an argument, as opposed to it being about, that intimate conversation, right? There was a British show. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was The Hour. And it had one of the most brilliant things I ever heard. And it just, I'm sure it just went over everybody's head. And the guy that played I can't think of the actor's name. The guy that played McNutty in The Wire was on the show. And he was the one that they were trying, it was about a BBC 1-hour newscast that they were trying to do in the early 60s or late 50s. Can't remember which, but it was a period piece.
Yuck.
A bloody period piece.
Yuck.
And the other actor, I can't remember his name. He's one of those younger actors, British actors that's really good. I can't remember his name. But he's the smart one. So he's the one that's producing the show. And the McNulty character, who's, the host, it's just not that, he's not that with it. It's not that he's stupid. He just, and he's just trying to get the producer to tell him what questions to ask this guest that's coming on that's, a groundbreaking thing. The producer looks at him and says, and the guy's younger than him, and he says, look, it's not that you don't know the questions to ask. You're really just afraid of the answers. You're afraid to ask questions because you know what the answers might be. This is one of the reasons Howard Stern did so well, is because he would ask questions that nobody else would ask. He'd have some musical guest on, He doesn't, I don't know if he even does this anymore. He's just gotten so ponderous and boring. But let's say he'd have some musical guest on, and as opposed to the musical, hey, the latest, oh God, I used to hate doing these things. Hey, tell me about the next record, or tell me about that song. Where did that inspiration come from? Or, gosh, golly, I love that record so much. Tell me more about that record. Howard Stern would say something like, come on, how many chicks did you get, after that record came out, right? Or that song? I mean, you had that hit song. Were you like were women taking their clothes off for you? Or Howard would say something like, but you understand, he would break through the wall and he would get into this intimate space. And it's the hardest thing to do, especially in this day and age where, everything is predicated on falsehood, where everything is upside down, where there is no real intimacy. It's all just about winning an argument. And the young people that are, that have bypassed journalism or bypassed broadcast or whatever it is they bypassed, and they think they're going to be the new next Hunter Thompson just because they're going to go out there and break the rules and do everything different. Well, there were reasons that there were rules there to begin with. There are rules. Once you learn them, break them. Once you've got them ingrained, by God, by all means, break them. But you have to understand the game you're playing before you can break the game. If you just start moving the chess pieces whichever direction you want, that doesn't make for a very interesting game. You've got to work within the rules of the chess game. Intimacy. when you're talking to somebody, doing a podcast, doing a radio show. There's that intimacy with the listener, and there's that intimacy with the person you're talking to if you're doing an interview. But mostly it's about that intimacy with the listener. Hey, you out there? Yeah, you. I see what you're doing. It's not very nice. Now, here is a story that sent me into a frenzy today.
That's right.
I mean, I read this. Yeah, you know, I have to be honest. Every day I read something that either sends me into a frenzy or I just say, well, that's about the dumbest thing I ever read in my entire life. But this one sent me into a frenzy. And I'm pulling this from the Media Confidential website, which is available at mediaconfidential.blogspot.com. And they actually pulled the news article from CNS News, which I think is one of those wacky right-wing Christian sites.
Joy, oh, happy day.
Now, just because, that's another thing that kind of gets to me, too, and not to get off on a tangent with you know, going in another 90-degree direction.
Yes.
But just because something is reported on a site that you may not think fits your particular worldview doesn't mean that what they reported on is incorrect. I see this all the time, like on FARC. I see this on, especially. But it's everywhere. You know, it's on Twitter. It's on everywhere. Well, according to this news article on XYZ website, and then somebody will chime in and say, oh, that was on XYZ website. I don't believe that. That XYZ website is just a shill for the left wing. Or that XYZ website is just a shill for the right wing.
The scum of society.
So just because something is reported on a website that you may not agree with doesn't mean that they've incorrectly reported it. That's a crazy thing about the internet, right? Finding an independent journalist that's just going to report things correctly or just going to report things that stand as the facts, as closely as they can report that, is damn hard. Anyways, back to the story.
Listen carefully to this guy.
Let's go back to the videotape. From the website Media Confidential, an executive producer at America's largest owner of radio stations, that would be, I do believe, iHeartMedia, advertised a job Thursday stating, quote, from the article, "We are looking at only diverse hires at this time." What that really means is, in my opinion, if I'm going to tell the truth as I see it, ladies and gentlemen, my truth, another phrase I hate,
Hallelujah.
white men need not apply. If you have white skin color and you have a penis, don't bother applying for this job.
Okay, I'll do it.
She stated, "We are looking only at diverse hires at this time." Kiddo, Molly Socha, is that her name? Molly, S-O-C-H-A. Malasuka. I don't think you understand what the word diversity means. Have you ever looked up the definition for the word diverse?
No.
Well, let's look it up. I've got the internet right in front of me. D-I-V-E-R-S-E, diverse. And through the magic of modern technology, as we move through the tubes, we go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary for the term diverse. We click on it, it comes up. People with diverse interests, a diverse population. That's not what Molly means, is it? I don't think so, in my opinion. In my truth.
Wow.
What she means is white men with a penis may not apply. Now, Molly Socha, who is an executive producer at Customs Podcasts at iHeartMedia, made the statement in an email sent to a listserv interested in the New York City radio industry obtained by CNS News, the wacky right-wing Christian website.
Are you nuts?
On this listserv, when Miss Socha, Saka? I don't know. Quote, diversity is incredibly important to our team. No, it's not. Hiring people other than men that are white is important to your team. Quote, diversity is incredible. It just sends me into an apoplectic frenzy.
All right.
Diversity is incredibly important to our team and our company, so we are looking at only diverse hires at this time, Soka said while describing the podcast editor-engineer position to members of the listserv. A listserv is a an email server. So basically, you know what a listserv is. If you don't, you're a moron. And I'm not going to explain it to you.
No.
From the Media Confidential website, while the iMart, that's what they should call themselves. Forget iHeart, it's iMart.
Unfortunately.
While the iHeart media producer made this stipulation in her email, it apparently is nowhere to be found on the public listing for the job. No kidding.
Uh-oh.
Molly here is in a management position for iHeart. Instead, the public announcement states that iHeartMedia, quote, is an equal opportunity employer and will not tolerate discrimination in employment, blah, 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 blah.
Heck.
You've read it before. You know what it says. Late Thursday afternoon, according to the Media Confidential website, Soka emailed the New York City radio listserv shortly after being contacted by CNS News with the following statement. In other words, the higher-up management at iMart read Miss Soka the Riot Act. It probably went something like this. And, I don't really know. Who knows? I'm not an ant on the wall. It probably went something like, oh, you better retract that right now, you stupid dumbass.
He's right.
You're right.
In my opinion. Anyway, she emailed the New York City radio listserv shortly after being contacted by CNS News with the following statement. I made an error in language. He made an error in language.
I'm a bad girl.
In my last note, so I just want to clarify. All, in capitals, are welcome to apply, and we consider all qualified candidates. Bullshit!
Thank God we live in a democracy.
That being said, in our efforts to evaluate diverse voices in the predominantly white podcast space. What? That being said, in our efforts to elevate diverse voices, once again, I don't think she understands what that word actually means.
God, that is so not true.
She's using the word diverse in its new twisted, tortured, strangled form, where it means if you're white and you're a man, don't bother. That being said, in our efforts to elevate diverse voices in the predominantly white podcast space, what?
But.
The white podcast space? Is she implying that it's too difficult for anybody that's not white to figure out how to do it? I subscribe to lots of podcast things on Twitter, and I see an awful lot of people of color with podcasts. It seems to me that, in my opinion, she's kind of being racist and implying that there's this white podcast space, that people that are not white can't figure it out.
Bloody anarchists.
That being said, according to what she wrote, that being said, in our efforts to elevate diverse voices in the predominantly white podcast space, bullshit! We strongly encourage engineers and editors of color, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, to apply. It seems to be that Miss Soka is trying to push her own personal little agenda. And if I was a white male, I wouldn't want to work for her anyways. She's obviously sexist against men and racist against white people, in my opinion. And they ask why I don't work in broadcasting anymore. Now, of course, by going through this entire diatribe, people would say to me, man, why are you saying this? You're saying, quote unquote, the truth.
Well,
iHeart's never going to hire you for anything, but they're never going to hire me for anything anyways, man. I'd get fired 5 minutes after I was on the air at that radio station that they owned, iMart, at any radio station they owned. Because I would state an opinion and I'd be fired immediately, because that's how it works these days. Unless your opinion toes the actual line of, the quote-unquote anti-racist propaganda. I hate even using that term, because the whole anti-racist thing is just racist. It's about hating white people and about hating men. And unless you toe that line, you're fired, man. You're out of here, because the Twitter mob is going to be down on you like flies on stink. And I stink too damn much.
he's right.
You're right.
Now, here comes the music.
JohnFord.radio. What a car, what a price, what a dealer, wasn't he nice? For a brand new Ford or a fine used car, here is the dealer, take our advice. It's time to say so long, sorry to say that it's time to go. Remember this spot on your radio. There'll be more entertainment for you that you'll find so enjoyable too. So tune in on Monday, because that is when that man...
Hey, John Ford?
Yeah.
Just shut up and play some records.